My name is Carl Quill, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Jenny Zhu is one of the most driven people I know. An MIT graduate who has been making games since high school, she founded Talofa Games in 2021, combining her love of fitness and her love of games. Jenny had a bit of an unconventional start into founding and shares how she's navigated a crash course in leadership, management, and building a studio. For those of you listening who are fresh out of school and thinking about founding a company, Jenny's story can help you better understand the details of what that can look like and the pitfalls therein. Let's dive in. All right. So I know that you are one of the younger founders that I've both had the opportunity to meet and get to know really well. And that means that your founding journey starts really early compared to some, a fossil like me who went through a bunch of different companies before I ever got the itch to found a startup. And so I'm wondering if you could share how you gained the conviction and idea of hey, I'm going to go and start a company. Like, what led to that moment of starting Talofa?
Yeah. And thanks for having me as well. I feel like throughout college, there's actually this narrative that I had been told of starting a gaming company is too hard. And in fact, you should not do it. And I started making games when I was 12. So I think my whole life there is this thought of I can do whatever I put my mind to. And because a lot of the games I made when I was younger were fairly successful, I was starting a gaming company surely shouldn't be that hard. But almost talking to more people made me more afraid of actually starting something. So I'd say the path to me actually going that this is the moment is actually somewhat of a funny story because I decided it is in fact not this moment when I graduated college and I ended up co-founding another company or somebody asked me to join them and they're like, I'm doing a gaming hardware thing. You want to come kind of co-found with me? So I said, sure, because I probably can't do it myself. Was my thinking was if I can't do it myself, everyone's told me it's too hard, might as well do it now that somebody's given me this chance to join them. And that ended up going very badly. I didn't get along and everyone told me to leave. They told me the culture was really tough. No way, this is good for you. This isn't what you want with your life. So I left. So kind of I found myself in this situation, with all my friends already accepted full-time jobs. I just had no job. And I was so depressed and so sad. And I think there was a part of me that was like, I'm so depressed and so sad that it can't get worse from here. So might as well just try. So that was a moment I was like, well, I have no job and I have no happiness. So it's time to do the hardest thing I can do because it can't get worse than having no job. So then at that time, I started asking everyone in the industry, the same people who told me it was really hard. And I was like, I kind of want to try this finally. And this was my senior year of college because I started that company in senior fall, left by senior spring, and it was right around GDC time. So basically, one person told me that there was this opportunity to do a Niantic contest, and I basically had no other choice but to do it. So I just did it, and that's essentially the start of Talofa was doing that contest, really officially starting up my own company. And there's a lot from there, but I'd say that was really the moment. It was this bright light in this pretty dark time for me.
Yeah, I think that's the first time I've ever heard someone really position it as, well, I don't have a job, so how much harder could it get? So I'm going to start a company. But I think it's really remarkable and awesome to uh, dive back in after a sort of very quick co-founding journey that turned out very poorly. So you applied for the Niantic sort of program, got in. Talofa was kind of started. From there, like suddenly you're okay. You not only sort of took a chance and maybe let's try a studio, but suddenly you're running a studio, like you have one and you're a part of this program. What did you feel like you had to kind of immediately go and figure out on that journey? Like, what were the things of like, okay, now I guess this is real. Now I have to go and learn X, Y, and Z that I didn't know before.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the biggest thing was that I applied, probably hitting about 25% of the requirements of the contest. So I had to learn Unity because I lied and said I had 5 years of experience when I had 1 month or 2 months. So I realized very quickly, okay, now I actually have to build an entire Unity production facing project. But I had strong confidence. I was like, I am an engineer, studied computer science at MIT, like surely I'll be okay. But also in the contest, I committed to you had to have a minimum team size of 3, and I asked if I could have a team of 1 because I had solo dev my whole life. They said no, you must have 3 because it's a hard contest. So I put down people I knew could not say no, which was my dad and my brother, without asking them. And then basically, once we got into that contest, I had to put them on my team. So breaking the news that they are now forced to be on my team and working together with my family for the first time, really in a situation that actually had stakes. Because my dad and I have actually in a way collaborated on all my small games growing up ever since I was 12. But he was like a beta tester, a QA tester, left feedback, but nothing more. And finally, on this project, I was the front end engineer artist, and he was the back end engineer. So we were working every day together. My brother was our voice actor slash engineer. So it was like this new way of working that I had to completely learn how to do in the 4 months that the whole competition was happening. So that was my first taste of I'm now running a operation that's not just me. So that was a very new experience.
So you entered the contest. You voluntold your dad and your brother that they're now part of this new entity and working with you. How did that go from sort of that kind of trial by fire into the more formalized company afterwards?
Yeah, yeah, definitely part of the whole experience that I think went from just family operation, I mean, trust. There's so much trust among family to now we're bringing in new people. Was like we ended up with that Niantic contest winning the whole thing, which then triggered us to get some more funding from Niantic and work together more closely with them. And that actually triggered them wanting us to build a bigger team. Like they actually told me, Jenny, you're 22. The biggest risk is not that you can't make a game because you've made a lot of games. It's that you can't hire. So the biggest learnings I'd say that were applicable were, yeah, bringing on people that were non-family and also much older than me. That was a very interesting dynamic because actually for a long time I felt like my design decisions or directions weren't as valid as these people I now brought on because they're older, they're more experienced, they come from EA, Riot, they were legit, so I should just stand by the wayside and let them make the calls. And that was probably one of my bigger mistakes of not trusting my own intuition, not trusting the game dev in me, and instead defaulting to my seniors, or I almost felt like they were my bosses at some point, and I really gave them that role. That I think was a big learning for me to, if I'm the CEO, I should act like it. I should make decisions and not outsource that to people I bring on, even if they do have the 20 years of experience, if it is my company that I want to drive forward towards my vision.
I mean, I feel like you went through such a crash course in sort of the journey of running a business and creating the studio. I don't want to say on a whim because I don't want to trivialize it, but going from the let me take a chance because what do I have to lose to suddenly oh, then we want a contest and suddenly I'm getting money and they're telling me to build this business. What when you think back on that and sort of the journey you
Mm-hmm.
went on, in especially in that early moment of making the decision to start a business and then sort of remaking that uh, doubling down on that decision to start a business once you won the contest and got more funding. when you think about folks who are thinking about starting a studio or at that point where they're like, well, I don't have a job, so what's the worst that could happen? Maybe I should go and start a company. What advice or learnings would you pass along to them? What is the most impactful thing that would be like, hey, in this moment, I want you should know this.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually very glad I didn't know more about starting a business. So I think the lesson there was like if you ask too many people whether you should do it or not, there might be actually so many people that tell you that you shouldn't do it that you actually don't do it, or people who are skeptical or jaded that like have the experience of maybe a bad company, or they didn't succeed and they don't want to see you succeed, or maybe they think it was just not worth it. So I ended up talking to a lot of people that initially that's why I didn't do it right out of college. But I did get the chance again kind of by that whim, and I'm really glad I did because it felt like I undid the wrong decision I made when I didn't start it. So I do think there's like somewhat of like too much asking if you should do it, that you should just like uh almost take the if you're in the right place, like just take the jump, because so much of what I've learned about starting a company, hiring people, it has been on the job. So it hasn't been that like I feel like I needed to know everything before I started, just like how I didn't hit all the requirements before I did the contest. Like it's okay to have like a big black hole of like what does it even mean to be a manager for the first time. I've never held a full-time role.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks who it's so easy, whether you read online or whether you listen potentially to the folks around yourself, that there's a lot of reasons. There's always going to be a reason to say no, right?
Hmm.
And so looking for the reasons to say yes and take the jump, I think, is how we can create really outsized opportunities for ourselves. So you go into the contest with your sort of your dad and your brother as your whole team,
Hmm.
and then you come out of the contest and sort of grow the company. Uh, since we've talked before, I know that you sort of consider your dad your main co-founder, but in general, what is your sort of co-founder makeup? Like, you're obviously the CEO, but how does your dad play into it? Do you have other co-founders? And just talk us through that of Talofa today.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of co-founders, it's still just me and my dad. Like there's a lot of lessons I took from my previous startup that didn't work out, that trust was the most important part. And trusting that your intentions are good in a co-founder relationship is actually pretty underrated, or it's easy to assume, but when time gets tough and like people are like, well, this is my company, or it's my dad is always under me in this company, or he is always he always like is supportive, but some of it comes from that desire of like we are all family, like we will not screw each other. And also the roles are really clear, like I'm the CEO, he's a CTO, and it's really easy to make decisions because I know no matter what, he's always going to trust my call at the end of the day, and he will push. We'll have disagreements, like we fight even though we're family, and we still try to challenge each other, but it's really nice to know that then at the end of the day, like he will defer to me, even though, and this is more of like a side tangent, a lot of people ask if he's my boss or if he's the one who started it. So it's always fun to be like, no, I'm the boss, but I do hold a lot of respect for his decisions, his experience, and he's very technical, having been like the top kind of rung of engineering in the companies he's been at. So I think in that way, like it was really obvious to me that we were a good match. Also because I'm a very pessimistic person and he's very positive, optimistic, which I guess wouldn't be obvious from maybe the way I pitch or all that. But I think he's just got an optimistic view of life that I think helps with the tough times in the company. So that's why I think in the end, like it was not just like the fact that he was the most convenient person, but he's just ended up becoming the right person for me at this stage of Talofa to work with on such a close level and make calls. Like we're on emails together, we fundraise together. There's like so much that I feel like I've benefited from him that like another co-founder added to that doesn't quite make sense. But there have been like important people at the company who like make decisions at the level of like the company that I trust, but just aren't officially named like a co-founder.
I'm curious. I think a lot of people, when they seek out co-founders, they do default to folks that they, to your point, have a high degree of trust with. Often that's, folks that they've worked with for a long time or shipped projects with for a long time. But it is hard to beat someone that you have grown up with, whether a sibling or extended family member, or in this case, your dad, to build that layers of trust. I'm curious, do you feel a real delta in, has there been a change in that sort of relationship, and how do you sort of separate the, hey, there's the relationship of father daughter, and then there's the relationship of co-founders, and they're both built on the same framework of trust, but like, let's have a clear delineation of when we're in which sort of hats, right?
Yeah. There's definitely been I'd say at the very beginning of the relationship too, like I leaned a lot on him for leadership and management since he has been a manager, led teams, and I was a 22-year-old new grad who cried at meetings that were too difficult. So it was that I actually deferred to him a lot in terms of how to be a solid leader in the first, say, 1 to 2 years of Talofa. And he'd like send me tips like during meetings of like, hey, you're like smiling too much. Like you don't have to smile that much. Or like, hey, you are talking too long. Like you should wrap it up. Or you should bring up this point, or this person did something really great, like give them a gratitude. So he'd be the sideline coach in a way. And now that I've matured, I don't cry anymore in meetings. He's actually taken much more of like a passive role there in terms of running meetings, or he'll send me things too. Like we'll message each other during all hands, being like, "Oh, that thing is really impressive," or "We should give that person a shout out." So it's transitioned the other direction of in business. He was a lot of a coach, and now he's more of the like peer. And then in terms of our father daughter relationship, I think it's really nice because in that growth, in that delta, he always says how proud he is of me as like a father. And he's like, I'm so glad that you've like grown up so much. Like you don't cry anymore. You make great decisions. You're so charismatic. Like in these meetings, I'm motivated listening to you. So those things, like hearing it from somebody who's seen me grow in that role and seen me at my worst, it's nice to know like as a person he's also proud of my growth. And we also do things called like co-founder lunches or co-founder dinners where we talk about just work, and then we do family dinners where we don't. So like my mother is not annoyed at us because we can talk too much about work, and like in the middle of conversation like an email comes up or like some initiative, so we try to keep it separate when it comes to that.
Yeah, I can imagine that your mother is very appreciative of that boundary.
Yeah.
A question that sort of comes to mind is, one of the things that I like to talk to founders a lot about is sort of how their co-founders group makes decisions, and like what guides those decision making processes when you're sort of working as those peers at a founder level, and especially when that leads to disagreement, like how do you guys resolve that disagreement? I'm curious, um, both sort of like, as you said, like there's been a growth and a change as you've matured and as the company's matured and as more people have come to the table. How has that sort of path of decision making together and disagreements between each other changed over that time as well?
Yeah, yeah. We operate on a like unanimous consent model where we believe that if both he and I agree on something, it's a good idea. And like if something I strongly believe in and he doesn't, like we try to like keep talking about it until we both do. So like when it comes to hiring, we won't hire somebody unless we both agree and it's a strong yes. But then, like some of the more operational things, like should I go with Carta or Pulley, things like that, that are very small, minute. Usually, I'm just left to do that, and he might have an opinion. I'll just take it. So there have been a couple points of like where we've had like game design or strategic differences, where it's like, hey, I really think we should like explore this emerging tech. Like, for example, there was like a big, when generative AI came out, there was like a lot of kind of pushback from my team, artists who didn't like it. He's very pro AI. I'm also very pro AI, but I wanted to keep in mind the kind of ethical, moral quandaries that came up on my team. And that was a moment where he was like, I don't understand. Like, why are people so negative? I was like, I can't understand. I talked to them, like, these are their reasons. And like, really trying to like help represent both my team, my personal opinion, his opinion. I think that was probably one of our bigger ones where we were really trying to figure out how do we talk about it to the team? Like, how do we make our own official stance if we are divided? So that was one where it took a lot of like talking through like why I felt a certain way, why he felt his way, and kind of present a more neutral stance where it was like we didn't fully agree in the end, and it was like pro slash like neutral, pro but cautionary was our final stance. And I felt good about it and he felt good about it. Like he didn't want to add the cautionary language. I didn't want it to be all pro. So we do end up trying to present like kind of in front of any team a united front. So even if we're disagreed on a couple things, like whenever we're in front of our team, we don't disagree. It's like a way to make sure we seem like strong leaders and we are in agreement on direction and all that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, you know, I think trust plays a lot of role in that ability to both drive to unanimous consent and know that you guys will likely get there, but then also know that disagreements will take time and like trust that, you know, you guys will work through it in that way. And I think that that's a place where having the relationship you guys do pays obvious dividends. Let's switch topics a little bit to fundraising. So now you sort of mentioned that you told the story of jumping into the contest and then winning the contest, and so that provided the sort of like initial funding, and that, you know, even that attracted more initial funding. But I'm curious, like, you know, when you started this whole thing and sort of entered the contest, and I guess even right at that moment, how did you think you would end up fundraising for the company, or did you think the company would sort of like exist financially, and how what actually happened in comparison?
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's like a fun side story to that too, because the contest ended up being the first way we got funded, but then we ended up getting venture capital, which was a whole other journey. But before I joined the contest, I didn't realize that the prize for it was $300,000, and that was an amount to me that seemed like enough to power me as an indie dev for multiple years. Like I don't need that much money to pay myself. Like I actually wanted to bootstrap my own indie game dev company and not pay myself, but just make money off of my games. So like basically free to play model with freemium. So that I think just getting the Niantic money, like $300,000, just graduated from school, I was like, wow, this is great. But then I realized that actually running a team, you need to pay people, and like that quickly makes you run out of money. So that process of actually like we had worked with Niantic. They funded us, and at some point we went independent. So we actually didn't have any more funding from Niantic. So I guess between thinking I'd bootstrap to having like a source of like publisher funding to not having publisher funding and going at it again as a bootstrapped operation, I thought that money would last forever. But I realized publishing and agreements like that are actually really hard to sustain. So then that left us in a position where we actually had 3 months of runway, and my whole team was saying like goodbye, like we no longer have Niantic money, like we're gonna die. And then I went out and did a desperation raise where I realized that all my friends are doing this like VC thing, like some of them were investors, and I pitched everyone I knew, and I basically got all no's. So in the end, like I did get one check from somebody I talked to at the very beginning, but this was like a very random way I got it was that during COVID, I started teaching this fitness class called Abs with Jenny, which is like a 5 minute abs class. And one of the people who happened to came was a VC. And I ended up talking to her prior to pitching any of these 40 other people about what I was doing, who I was, the fact that we had no money and were running out of money and didn't know how to pitch. And she took a chance. Like she was like, I actually really like you, Jenny, and your background. And I think what you're onto has potential. Like I'll put in a check. So that was currently still one of our biggest investors to date, basis set, and she just took a chance. Like I had nothing, so I found out the path to venture by another sheer coincidence. But through like I did put in the effort and like I taught the class, but I just didn't expect that it would have put me in the position of receiving my first check.
Yeah, I think one, that's very amazing in general, but I think folks always expect, if you haven't interacted with venture before very much, I think everyone expects it's very data driven and logic driven and business like check the box driven, and so much of it, especially early fund, is about relationships and connection, and honestly comes down to the perception of you as a founder almost more than the perception of you as a business. And so, you know, like having a class that you attend regularly with another person in the venture space can lead to those deals, let alone teaching an amazing class. And I'm confident, based on what I know of you, it was a very hard class. So it was like a 10-minute abs class compressed into 5-minute abs, given your fitness level. Uh, so so you sort of started out with Niantic money, and then you got the check from the investor. Now today for Talofa, I know you sort of moved past that and are doing pretty well, and you have even revenue coming in from a game. How are you generally funded and operating today, in whatever detail you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, yeah. And for now, it's all pretty much all VC money still. Like we have some amount of revenue, but it's not significant. Like that's actually probably more of the goal in this upcoming year. And for us, like we've actually felt like relying on venture capital to scale hasn't been a big issue because we're in this interesting intersection of fitness and games. And it's such a like I wouldn't say unproven, but it's a blue ocean space that there's really not too many examples outside of like Niantic, Zombies Run of household names that exist in this space, but I just am so passionate about it. And it shows like in the pitches and the way the company is run that like we just want to make something people haven't seen or a category that people haven't seen. So because of that, I think I've been very lucky in fundraising of people who also similarly believe that there should exist more experiences that get people to go out, work out, and are shaped like a game. So that's that's how we've continued to raise rounds. Like we did a pre-seed, we did a pre-seed extension, and then we did a official seed just earlier this year, and that's how we've been operating now for about. We've been around for about 5 years, but the last 2.5 have been through venture. So the first 2.5 were bootstrap slash Niantic supported.
And with the fundraising so far, sort of outside of the surprise check from the sort of first big investor, what has been sort of the biggest learning and biggest surprise of that fundraising journey for you?
Yeah, yeah. I would say probably the hardest part about the fundraising journey was more about confidence for me was that I truly like the first time I pitched could not articulate why this was a $1 billion business. And I it just felt so ungenuine, like ingenuine and like a lie when I would say like I will guarantee you multiples on your investment. This is why you need to give me millions of dollars. It felt like something as a like Asian person growing up, I was like always told be humble. And I was. And it was one of those moments where I had to brag, had to boast and like talk about my achievements as they were. And like they weren't even exaggerated, but it just felt uncomfortable. Like talking about like, oh, like I've made all these games with millions of downloads. I'm like super young, like you need to invest in the future of gaming, like all this stuff that was true, but like saying it in a way that was so awkward when it started that like it took a while to be like, I can own this part of my journey. I can own the fact that I've made good games in the past, yet not knowing the future, still be optimistic about it. And there was this like personality shift I had to take on of like separate the personal, humble version of me that can still exist and project this confident, daring leader that thinks they can change the world. So that was definitely one of the harder parts to get used to, and also not feel like I was just outright lying all the time, but truly like had some plan for the future. And that was probably something that took like a couple of rounds of fundraising to really nail. And I'd say the biggest surprise of that process was how just learning how to fundraise was so much about, yeah, as you said, the relationships and like the fact that I had to play this dance with investors of not sharing literally everything that I thought of, like sharing all the challenges, sharing all our updates, but have an air of mystery or have some amount of like you want to feel like you're the most wanted person by not being fully available. Like these are all like psychological things I thought felt slimy or felt weird and felt, yeah, again, kind of not me, but were quite helpful. And there is a lot of reason to not share everything on your mind with somebody that might give you money. So just learned a lot on like the art of disclosure and not uh, trusting too fast or not oversharing too fast, which can be applied to personal life too.
Yeah. Yeah. The learning how to give an air of mystery and not overshare and not be like I'm. That is a journey I am still on. I am very bad at it. I, by nature, have always tried to be a pretty open and available person, and I like talking and sharing and connecting with folks. And so every time I get the feedback of I have to be uh, more mysterious, I have to like do that kind of stuff. It's so hard for me to internalize and get there. It's so against my nature. One of the sort of one of the pieces that you shared though is like going on this journey. What's been really hard for you, and you've been learning, and so much of it. Even early on in your journey, where you um, relied on your dad to help coach you in the leadership and the management, and you've been growing all this time. Um, what as you've been going on this founding journey, and especially now, in where you are on this founding journey, what are your primary support structures? Like, how do you make sure that you, Jenny, are taken care of on this path?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually used to rely a lot on my team and tell them everything I was stressed about. And I realized soon, very quickly, that you shouldn't do that with the team, but you can do that with others. So I'd say early on, like one of my first, like, I would call mentors in quotes, since like now I feel like most of my mentors are really just peers who I admire or have relevant experience and are people that I turn to. I mean, even like you, Carl, who I can ask questions to. But like one of my first was actually Kelly from One Up. I met her as a senior in college, and at the time, like really didn't know anything about venture or the fact that one day she would become one of my investors. And she was at not even in venture at the time. So I think just early on, it was like these mentor type figures who just told me like what the industry was like, gave me feedback on my games, gave me feedback on my pitches. And slowly that's evolved into like a close group of peers who I have like one group that I've met up with for the last 3 years, where every month we'll do like a little brain trust, as we call it, and just help each other out. And I'd say those peer CEO relationships have become one of my more primary, like tactical support structures. And then, other than that, I have a therapist, I have a life coach, a two exec coaches, and they help me out with like the more emotional stuff. Like I'm so stressed, or I don't know what's going on. I'm like really sad. So like there's like professional help I have as well. And there's like the coach side of it, which is more like I want to be a better leader, to like the therapist side of like I'm sad. So I think that's been really helpful for just every 2 weeks I'll have like one of these meetings. Or I think I'll have like one a week on average, like 4 a month, one call with each of these people. So that helps me stay sane.
What's the biggest gap you have right now where you wish you had more support?
Yeah, I think the area right now is perhaps like the phase I'm in is one where I don't have to focus as much on fundraising and I actually have to be a better leader. Like I've actually been told by my team, like you can take on more of a leadership role. Like you don't have to be an operator anymore. And as a game dev, like a lifeline game dev, I'm like, but I want to do more game dev. I want to code more. I want to do this stuff. So I'd say like the leadership stuff, like how do you actually run a team, drive consensus on how do you make decisions? How do you make sure people's morale is high? How do you do a performance review? Like these like leadership things I think are the areas I wish I had more support on. That's uh and like maybe like with these CEO peer groups, like I feel like I have like everyone's so busy. Everyone's a CEO, so it's like some of those like are less reliable or like also everyone is busy. So maybe some formal leadership training, manager training.
For what it's worth, like I think there's lots of folks out there who are great support structures on that, and I'm certainly happy to connect you to all the folks that I've learned a bunch of management stuff from and that kind of stuff. And I'm super happy to talk to you about it whenever
Hmm.
you want. But rather than bore the podcast with suddenly diving into management training, um, again, I'm sort of framing this question for the purposes of like, as someone who is potentially listening and thinking about like, maybe I want to go on this founding journey. It sounds like Jenny was able to figure it out, so maybe I can too. And so like, let me think about it. What would you say is sort of like the biggest struggle you've had over the journey so far that you would sort of pass along of like, hey, if you're thinking about doing this, super encourage you to do it, but understand like you might face a struggle like this, and here's some ways to approach that you may or may not have had that you want to arm someone else.
Yeah, I'd say my biggest struggle has been to be my biggest struggle has been managing the team and also dealing with people who aren't performing. I'd say like it's especially hard because I every time like I hire somebody, it's like I assume it will work out. And like knowing that like somebody is not working out, like seeing that they're failing and like really trying, like I've given many, many second chances and like I've had people actively tell me this person shouldn't be on the team and I'm like, "No, I believe in their power to change." And that's definitely been something where only in like these last few months too, like I have like turned around parts of my team morale by like people leaving. So that's been hard. And that also reminded me of another part, which is as a founder, my biggest thing is I always like want to conserve cash. And like as a result, hired a lot of contractors to start because part timers were a little cheaper than and like the hours are more flexible. So you can always go down to like the minimum. But then I realized actually that was not the right way to approach it. I actually now have a mostly full time team with very few contractors, like just one or two. And like my desire to save money was like running up against like having the best team. And like now I've like been way more intentional about like if somebody's on the team, this is the only thing they work on. But it just like it was definitely a big struggle to get over that mental block of like, I'm just gonna build the fastest team and the cheapest team I can. And it doesn't matter that they're like the best person for this role if I can just skirt by and have them also have halftime here and have just like a fully halftime team.
Yeah, I think so much of that too. Coming from initially thinking you were going to bootstrap, maybe get a little prize money, but then mostly bootstrap. I think that can anchor you so much in as far as how you think about runway and how you think about spending money, right?
Hmm.
That and it can be so hard to break your brain out of those patterns for sure. So for Talofa and for yourself, really on this founding journey, what do you see on the horizon that you're thinking a lot about? Like, what's to put crassly, what's keeping you up at night, but also in a positive way. Like, what do you look on the horizon? And you're like, I'm excited about this, and also terrified about that.
Yeah, yeah. And we recently have been building a new game. Kind of, we launched our first one, and it got good press. Got helped us raise our round, but it was really clear to us like actually we have If our vision is to make a bunch of games in this fitness gaming space and be a leader here, we have to make more. So taking that leap and being like, this is the next thing I'm going to fall in love with, and the next thing we're going to put our name to is a little scary, like because it's like we people are now, they know about us and they hear about the fact that we raised, and there's a lot of expectation there. So I think for a long time I struggled with like, is this the right thing? Is it the right decision to pivot? And well, like it's not pivot but expand our offerings. And in the like, I think these days I feel a lot more confident that like, yes, we've actually found something awesome. And like we have a little Discord that like self-organize and they talk to each other and they love what we're building. And we already hear stories of it like helping people get out of bed and helping them with depression. And I'm like, this game's only been 3 months in development. That's pretty crazy that we can do so much. So I think that's just for me the biggest thing is like taking that leap to say, yes, we are ready to unveil this to the world and put our name to it is like the thing I like often struggle to be like, are we there yet? Or do we need more data? Like, do we need to like keep iterating, throw it away? Like, I don't want to hold on to something that's not working, but I have strong faith that this is getting there. So it's just a very different problem than like we're running out of money and I need to pitch the next thing to get to the next round. This feels a lot more real and tests my ability as a game dev, because also this game for me, I've taken on the leadership role of like creative director for the first time and like have a much more active part in it. So there is a part of me that's like, I hope I'm right. I hope the decisions I've made on the creative front pay off.
Yep. I can definitely relate to that feeling quite a bit. I'm on the verge of a game release, and so much of that, like, oh man, I set us down this path, 6 months ago or 3 months ago. Like, did I
Hmm.
choose wisely? Does it pay off? We'll see. Um, Amazing. Let me ask you a completely unfair question. In the future, like, sort of try to put aside in your brain whatever happens to Talofa, like successful exit, or it unfortunately runs out of gas at some point. Whatever happens, sometime in the future, you're faced with the decision of starting another company. Do you think you would do it? Would you start another company?
Well, I think with a caveat, I think I'd try to do it in I would definitely want to try something different, like in terms of like, I think I would want to optimize for learning. So if I were to do another company, maybe I'd want a co-founder this time. That's not my parent, yeah, not my family. So it would have to be another company that I think is doing something slightly different, maybe slightly different industry, or like, because I do think if I were to see at Talofa kind of to the end, whether positive or bad, I would want to do it in a way that I've like done everything I can. So in theory, I've like seen everything in gaming, fitness that I would be interested in and do it with the company. So I don't know. Like I think it's like unfathomable to not be working at Talofa, but I think it'd be interesting to do it and do it slightly differently the next time around. Like I see all these decisions I've made, and most of them I've band-aided already. Like hiring decisions that were bad, like they've been corrected. So I think when I think about another gaming company, I honestly don't know if I would do anything differently than what I've done so far, given where I was at the time I founded. So I think it would be really fun to do something in a different space or try to do something with more people at the start, co-founders, multiple, who knows? But it is interesting to think about restarting.
No. Yeah, I think I asked this question in part because, like, I think it's always interesting to me to see folks process that. Like, do I want to go on this journey again? Like, you are where you are, right? And some people, like, different people have different relationships with it. But I remember after, my first company closed, I'm like, I don't know if I'll do that again. And now I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up doing it again, regardless of how this turns out. I can't understand what it would be or the thing, but like, it's a pattern at this point. Amazing. So the way I like to close out these conversations is sort of what I nickname an introspection lightning round. But basically, these are a series of quick questions that I would often ask folks that I was co-founder dating when starting my two companies as an early conversation to sort of level set. And it all comes from this idea that the strengths and weaknesses of the founders ultimately become the strengths and weaknesses of the organization they built. And so this was always like, hey, let's get to know each other and get to know each other's strengths, weaknesses, and sort of see how a co-founding journey would sort of look like. And so I'll ask, and
Mhm.
get your answers, and we'll just work through them. So the first one is, what is your superpower?
Yeah, it's processing information at a really fast pace since I watch Netflix and all my anime at 5x speed. I think 3 to 5x is my ideal pace of consumption. So I can definitely get through like material, learning, makeup for stuff I don't know, just because I can also, it's from years of reading manga. Like I just consume.
Yep, you got to get through all thousand arcs of One Piece or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, my husband is desperately trying to get me to start on that journey. I'm just deeply intimidated.
Yeah.
What is your biggest strengths?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely my physical strength. Like I run every day, I lift all the time, and I think it just helped me a lot like in terms of being able to do hard work. Like honestly, like being really physically fit or able to get through physical pain has made me really good at dealing with difficult work situations because nothing can beat my heart rate hitting 190 and like feeling like I'm on the verge of death to like come back to work and be like this won't kill me. So that's probably my biggest strength, like getting to being able to take a lot of pain, like physically, because of my workout regimen.
That's yes, and we are a audio only podcast, but I have hung out with Jenny and tried her exercise game, and she is deeply committed to her fitness regimen in a way that I am very humbled by. What are your big weaknesses?
Yeah, I'd say my biggest weakness is my desire to rush. Like it's probably tied to the superpower, but I really want to like move on to the next step. Like I'm uncomfortable with ambiguity, so I rush to like the first decision or try to do things really quick. Somebody brings up something in a meeting, let's do it. Like I actually have this like uh, anxiety of losing something or like a thought process if it's not done immediately. So that has I've been actively told by my team to slow down or to let it sit. And that's been something I've been trying to learn is like not everything has to be like a do or die right now. Like you can leave things and if it comes back up, it means it's important. Otherwise we can let it go. Yeah.
What are your stress reactions?
My first one is definitely to cry. Like, I think the moment I'm like in a tough conversation, even yesterday, we had a tough conversation, with my product team, and I was like, people are upset, I'm gonna cry, or I feel like I'm gonna cry. So I think it's actually like both a stress and a nice indicator because I know something's bothering me. So I take action on it and then the tears don't fall. But that's definitely like the first is my tear ducts start to turn on.
I mean, I think that the nice thing about that is it's like whenever those stress reactions are deeply physical, like I think they get your attention much faster than if they are just like I start getting cranky or I start like being losing my temper more or whatever, having
Hmm.
that sort of like my body reacts in this very visceral way is like, oh, okay, something's going on.
Hmm.
What are your upkeep needs? Like, what are the things you need to have happen? Mainly in a sort of work setting, I think, but like in your founding journey, what do you need to have happen on a regular basis? Otherwise, you will start to like have stress
Hmm.
reactions and go off the rails.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say it's gratitude as well as acknowledgement of progress, just because I've started so much of this journey with no idea of what it meant to found a company, like hearing you're doing a good job or like this great progress like from my investors like validation of like the direction we've set like that's always nice to know that I'm like on the right path or that I should keep going like and then for my team it's like those little comments of thank you Jenny for jumping in when I needed help or you're always online like thank you for being so available always for questions that even like if I worked like from morning to dawn like or to dark like just that one sentence, I'm like, I can do it again. So it's really like those two things that I need.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Jenny, for spending this time with us and answering all of my questions. Is there any messages you want to send out there? Any shout outs? Anything you want to put out there here at the end of the pod?
No, just like there's like too many people to thank, so I think it's too hard. But I think definitely thankful to like the One Up community for bringing us together, and I think just to those, I think every step of the way I've like reached out to somebody who's like helped to make things possible. So I think just like the founders along the way, and my dad for birthing me. So those are probably the key ones.
And then finally, if a potential founder or someone listening to the podcast really enjoyed something you had to say or had a follow up question, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, I'd say my email probably is the best, just jenny@talofagames.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, it's just been an amazing pleasure, as always.
Yeah, thanks, Carl.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founder support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.